now, now once I get past, I think slide 10 or 11 or something, there's no notes, so that's why I thought I'd ring you instead of going through, because it was just confusing me a bit.
Yeah.
So this one really simply just to say, because the lesson plan and the presentation don't match.
Yeah, they're completely different, because this was the presentation that Holly first sent, which had this one, but then the blank lesson plan that she did send had the other slide on it. But I didn't want to mess with the slide, because if I mess with the slides too much, it changes the formatting. It just goes black.
Yeah. So if that's the case, put a note for Holly so she picks up on it. But to be honest, I hate the slide that's got all of the boxes on. Everything we need to say, the facilitator should remember that stuff, have that as notes, and discuss that stuff within these 3 headings. They shouldn't have to have a million boxes, because it just looks like we're trying to give a million rules. So I would prefer these 3 boxes anyway. So that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. I was going to say about changing this one, because everyone will have done it, but actually people on the refresher won't have done it, because they would have had face-to-face training. So that's fine. I've changed this vision and mission slide just because I think the other one is pants with the grey background.
Yeah, I always thought that it didn't really go with the theme and stuff. So yeah, I
like. But you might want to put something over that person there so that it doesn't just look like a head chopped off person. But I'll let you decide about that. The really important thing here is, and what we should be doing on every single one of our courses, is at this point asking them how it connects to the course that they're on. And really making that clear to them. Love this one. I think this is really important right at the beginning. However, we're kind of going into the course without doing this bit. So I think that we should be going back and actually having a look at, I think we should be introducing it before we go on to any activity. So that's what I would do there. So just swap that round. But I think this one's really important. But one of the things that I think is missing from this is, so we've got activity 6, why is culture so important? But I've put draw out the continual safeguarding training and refreshers benefit culture, shared language across the organisation, shared understanding, shared thresholds, updated knowledge and confidence to support each other. That's why culture is so important to safeguarding. So it's about drawing that out, and that wasn't. Remember, when you're doing this, Becky, I really need you to remember that you're not the only one delivering it. When you go back to the lesson plan, I need everything that we're talking about now put in there. Draw this out, find this out, do this. That's quite missing from this lesson plan. The lesson plan on this one is very much like, we'll come to this bit in a minute, but it's very much just copied and pasted from what was already there. I need more detail on, and this is what you need to find out, this is what you need to draw out, this is the point of this slide, if that makes sense. So if you can go back to it and think, what would somebody else need to know to be able to do this as well, that'd be fantastic. This one, I don't particularly think it's needed. I think it's just a bit of a slide for slide's sake at the moment, because we've just done that in culture. So I would probably drop that one. I think it is important. That one for me is very much on the awareness one. When people are like, why am I at the awareness? I'm an admin assistant. Why am I at the awareness? I work in finance or whatever. That's when this slide is really important, because frontline workers generally get that. But people who aren't frontline workers don't. I think this is fantastic. I think this is really good at this point as well, pulls us into it really quickly. I think that in the joining instructions, we need to make sure that it says pre this training course what they need to do. So you need to, and it might be, think back, go have a look at your workbook that you completed for the alert or the awareness. Remind yourself, have a look over it, remind yourself, or it might be have a look at the policy and process, whatever it is, because we don't want them to fail this completely.
Yeah.
But also do say to them that it is going to be anonymous as well.
Yeah.
Let them, when they do their answers and things, it's not a case of we're not checking up on them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is where I started getting confused. So I started working through this bit fine, and I'll talk you through my bit, and then I'm going to go back to this bit. So at this point, I put, what's the point or context of this slide? Is it an introduction? Are they going to discuss and explore? We can't just introduce this and leave it. At this, so we've done the quiz, which is kind of checking their current knowledge or what they remember, and what will come out of this is that they don't particularly remember a lot, but different people will remember different things. That's absolutely fine. But then this one goes straight into recent themes nationally, and then you go straight into legislation, straight into categories of abuse, and then down here you then start exploring it in detail. And it's, I don't quite understand why you've done it in that way. I think it needs to be split so that we talk about legislation, then we talk about the national themes and explore them, then we talk then we talk about the categories of abuse, then we talk about the national themes and explore them. I'm not sure, like these, to me, these 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe that one, I know 4 slides here seem completely out of place. What I started doing on these, and I'll talk through that first, is making recommendations for these slides, and then it wasn't until I got further down that I realised it was a little bit mashed up. So I'll just go through these ones first, and then I think it'll be about rejigging some of them. So so this one, go back to this one. So this one, I think it's needed, but I just wasn't sure of it being placed here. So just consider that as we're going. This one I don't think is needed at all. I think we make that point on awareness and alerter, and it's just to make the point. It's not to labour it, if that makes sense. Now this one I actually think should be your main legislation and guidance slide. Remember, this is a refresher course, not the first time they've heard it. So I've put here, and this was before I'd seen that you'd put all the other legislation bits in, so I'll come back to that in a minute. I put here, this slide needs to be used explicitly and ask about each element in the triangle. What do they remember? Someone tell me about the Children's Act. Someone tell me about the Care Act. Tell me how you've used it since you've done your safeguarding training. Tell me about changes in local safeguarding partnerships. What other legislation are you aware of that's been updated recently? And then I've put, at each level, you need to draw out a discussion, i.e. what is your policy? Who has used the policy to respond to safeguard concerns? Give me some examples of how local authorities you refer to present their guidance, etc., etc. So what I was saying is that this slide, I think, when we rejig things in a minute, should be the complete introduction to all of the legislation guidance update. I think this should be, I think specifically this should be the slide that you have as you're talking around it. But then I do think some of the other stuff should come in, so I'll go to the other stuff in a minute, but I just want to go through the slides that I've commented on so that they make sense. And then this, so where I got confused here is, this bit's, where's this bit? So this bit's great, but obviously this bit here, all of the titles and things needs changing. So if you want to play around with that, because obviously it doesn't make sense otherwise. But then that's great. I think this slide's needed, but just not here. I think this slide isn't needed. I think this slide's needed, but not here. And I think this slide is needed, but changed. So I've put here, for this one, categories of abuse, a refresher, I'd run through each category super fast in the full group. So someone tell me in a sentence what XXX category means, what Y category means, just a definition. I'd then put them in pairs so that they can work through this better. I'd change the question to which of these are you seeing in your service and how is it presenting itself? Prepare to come back to the group with an example of what you're seeing and how you're responding. In pairs, give each other examples and ideas of how to respond. Depending on time and detail of your example, you may be able to work through numerous categories, or numerous categories may present itself in your service or with your example.
Yeah.
So that's about really having a focused look at actually bearing in mind that they all come from different services.
Yeah.
What are you seeing within your service? What of these are you seeing? Think of a customer, think of an example, talk through with the person in your pair what you're seeing and how it's presenting itself, what signs and symptoms, and then what you're currently doing to respond to it.
Yeah.
See if they would do anything differently and do it vice versa, and be prepared to discuss your example with the full group.
Mm-hmm.
I think that will then draw out all of this, and I think that should be quite a big activity that you're really checking in on, because that's making that will be really important for them.
Yeah.
And then that will lead nicely into the humankind stuff.
Yeah.
So
still do the poll as well on that one, yeah?
Sorry, I was going to move that, but I won't move that yet. So, so on the next bit, I've put, I put there, I love the poll idea, because you can compare it to the figure on the next bit. I think the poll is a great thing to do. And then I think that'd be brilliant when you can compare it here.
Yeah.
So I put have a detailed discussion, connect to earlier poll, see if the percentages are similar for them. And then for this one, I'd be also asking if this is reflective of their service, as there's so many different services. So I'd be just talking through that, and I'd also be asking if they know what it means. Do they know what a referral to Safeguard an Adult means? Do they know what a referral to Prevent team means? Do they know what Clare's Law application means? Because some of them really might not. Yeah,
especially as there's only one referral for Clare's Law.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're saying like, are these what you expect? If not, why not? If yes, why do you think? You can pull out Clare's Law and say, well, do you think it might be because people don't know what Clare's Law is?
Yeah.
Does everybody here know what it is, or do you know that type of stuff? Sorry, I'm just letting my dog back in again. Obviously working from home. So all of this bit that I've just gone through, I think is really important, but what doesn't make sense is why you're going recent themes, legislation, categories of abuse, humankind specifics, and then here you literally go legislation, recent themes. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I wonder about actually deciding what order you think it needs to go in. And then if you're doing the legislation bit, have this is, I think that's your main legislation slide. Yeah. And then I would have the legislation bits wherever they are. So that's a legislation bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's a legislation bit. And there's another one about Children's Act somewhere. I would have those ready to pull up. Do you know when you're talking about this and you come to whichever bit it is? I'd probably put Mental Capacity Act in this top one as well, Becky.
Yeah.
But when you come to them, when people are when you say, does anybody know what the Care Act is? Has anybody used it, operated within, etc.? Then just flick the slide on so it's in the background as they're talking.
Yeah.
Then go back to this one, and then ask about the Mental Capacity Act, and then have that in the background. Then go and then ask about whatever, and then have this in the background, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd probably just have all of those slides sat there, but just to flick up in the background as they're talking.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably as well maybe have a screenshot of the Humankind Policy, Procedures and Guidance to bring up as well.
Okay.
I'd probably have this slide. Where is it? This slide. To pull up when you're asking people to talk about their local authority policies, procedures and guidance. And you can take a screenshot off of Google for one of the government guidances or the Charity Commission professional standards or whatever.
Yeah.
And I would just have, I'd literally just have them to pull up as somebody's talking. So they might be up for like 3 seconds, but it'll be really helpful for somebody visually to be able to do that. And really helpful. So if the person who's explaining it is struggling, you're not testing them really, you're helping them. So I would have those up there, but remember when you're doing the lesson plan that you'll need to explain what the point of those slides are. They're not slides to go through, if that makes sense. Slides to explain, and so that would be your legislation bit would come first, I would probably say. And let me just have a look. So your legislation bit would probably come first. Then I think I would go on to the humankind specifics stuff, and find out what their so all of this type of stuff. So the categories of abuse, humankind, and I would spend a good amount of time on this, and then connecting it to this and this, because you can do so much between, so Joe, you gave an example of physical abuse for older teenagers and with an emotional connection and exploitation, etc. Where would that, if you were making a referral, where would that fit in here then? That type of thing. So there's so much you can draw out of this activity. If you wouldn't get all of them to feed back, but you could get quite a few of them to feed back. And you could go to other people to say, what would you do within that situation or whatever. It could be a really good conversation. And then when you come onto these ones, it gives you everything you need to introduce those and to discuss those. This is a really, really big piece of learning for them, because it's about, are we reporting enough? Are we reporting too much? Do we understand that type of thing? And it's also that will really draw out for you as a facilitator how many which ones of the categories of abuse are being portrayed most and how they're presenting themselves. So when you come onto the new stuff in a little bit, you'll know what to labour a little bit more as well. So I would go this one, then the legislation, this one, then the humankind stuff, and then I would move on to this one, which is the recent themes nationally. And because then you can say, brilliant, so we've talked about, we've all got a understanding of the main categories of abuse, which are here. We've talked about what we're seeing in humankind, which is here. Now let's have an update of some of the things that have changed nationally over the last 3 years. Now, some of these you will have seen and be aware of, because this is 3-year refresher. Some of these will be really quite new to you. And then I would introduce it like that. And then that's when I would go into, and then I'd say, now we're kind of going into learning mode, where we're going to be kind of teaching you some new things. And that's when I would go into these specifics of different things. I would put, in fact, the Domestic Abuse Bill 2019, I would put up with legislation. And I would say, I'm drawing your attention to two, and I'll come back to this in a sec, to 2 key pieces of legislation. So there has been lots of changes. We've just refreshed some legislation, etc. But actually, there's also 2 bits that you won't have heard about on your refresher, on your previous training, because they're so new. And I would do the Domestic Abuse Bill. I would also do the COVID legislation. Because there's some real specific stuff. If you Google COVID legislation and connections to safeguarding, there's some real specific stuff about how schools can respond, how authorities can respond, the different rights that parents do and don't have, and things like that. It's just worth being aware that actually there's some new things to consider within the context of COVID.
Because they changed the Mental Health Act as well, didn't they, around COVID?
Yes, exactly. And what I'd probably say, actually, for the legislation bit, I'd maybe say, in fact, I think I probably would, in the legislation bit at the top, let's see how it looks when you write it. I'm just wondering whether it would be best to go into these bits of legislation up there, or whether it would be, best to go into those when you come down to these recent themes and changes, wherever that's gone. Because you could change that instead of recent themes nationally. You could put 3-year update, or changes over the last 3 years, or things that we've seen in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So that this is a title slide, like an introductory slide, and you could put domestic abuse bill, pandemic, and mental health stuff, and then that can all be part of the refresher part, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That might work better, because then what you're doing is you're introducing it, which is perfect. Then you're giving the context of why they're there, which is really, really important, that this is connected to refresher. Then you're refreshing what they already know. So this bit is the refreshing of what they already know. You're then linking it to them personally, and then you're introducing new information. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that as a way to deliver it, I'm just wondering whether this needs to change. Yeah, so I would probably change this title slide as well to say, today we will, and then put refresh previous knowledge covered in awareness alerter. Look at humankind specifically. Obviously you can word it better than my brain's not working. And introduce you to new information and themes. So you could just have that as 3 kind of bullet points, and then you could set the presentation in that way. Yeah. Does that make sense? Because then when you get down to wherever that slide's gone that I can't find again, you'd have to play around with, I don't even know where it is there. You'd have to play around with this slide, and you could potentially take some of it off or move it around or whatever, and put in the other things. But then this title could be introducing you to new information, or changes in the last 3 years, or something like that. Yeah. And then you would do all of this type of stuff. So you'll do the domestic abuse bill. I think there has to be something on COVID as well. Yeah. What are we seeing? And you can do a slide or two. So you could have what we're seeing through COVID. It's too early to make 2 assumptions. These are the themes. These are the best guesses moving forward. Here's some of the legislation change. Do you know, that type of thing as well? Yeah. See, I don't know why. Yeah, see, none of these really completely make any sense to me. There's no context to what's happened, what you're doing with them. So there just needs to be, if it's to introduce that information to them, then we need to think of how to do it, because it can't be presented, if that makes sense. I know there's a few videos, so we can present it from we're going to present you with new information, if that makes sense. Yeah. But then we need to just put a little bit more thought into how we're going to contextualize it. So I guess introducing it, you'll know some of this information because it's over the last 3 years, but some of it might be completely new to you. We're basing it on the fact that last session you had with Tay was 3 years ago. And then I would link back. So if I was talking about disguise compliance, I'd be like, and like Joe Bloggs said right at the beginning, in fact, I know that there's been a serious case review that Humankind's been involved in within their family services because of disguise compliance. So it's about kind of going back and recognising and connecting to them personally. Yeah. So that's. What's this one? Yeah, we just need to think how it's connecting to what we're introducing. Yeah. I can't see anything particularly useful about this slide at all, if that makes sense. Yeah. If you're going to watch what's this short video clip about?
It's the short one around county lines, which, to be fair, I think they do watching aware alerter, don't they? But it's just because we don't really. It is such. It's a common theme that does seem to come out quite a lot when we talk about them. But you know, when we do alerter, because we talk about modern slavery and exploitation that way, but not so much around other forms of exploitation. And especially because I've had some say, well, we definitely get our older are targeted through like cuckooing and squaring, and then you have those that work with young people going, but then we have it with the young people selling the drugs and all that kind of stuff.
Fantastic. So this is where you say, so don't present it like this at all. This is exactly where you say, do you know, and I think you should be saying this all the way through. Do you know, I deliver hundreds of awareness and alert for humankind, and one of the things that comes out a lot is about exploitation, particularly some of your older people who are being exploited in their own homes, and then your younger people that are exactly what you've just said about the cooking, county lines, etc. And then do an activity or have a discussion around it. But don't just introduce it like this again. So with the refresher one, it's very much about seeing where they're at and then giving them what they need where they're at, if that makes sense. So if you've identified that, I think that's fantastic. But I don't think just presenting them with information would work. So it might be that you introduce it by having watching the video and saying we're going to watch this video on or whatever it is, and then you talk about the poster, and then but you put it in the context of exactly what you've just said there, rather than just arbitrary information. But frustratingly, but also importantly, will be detailing this on the lesson plan. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Where have you seen it? What are the questions you're going to ask, and what's the outcome you're trying to get from it? And again, and that just connects to it. So none of this, it's not about none of this being there. It's just it just kind of sits there, and I can't see why it's there.
It doesn't flow and stuff.
I think you've picked the perfect bits out of disguise compliance, and I think the activity is perfect as well. But potentially, I would do the activity first.
To introduce it.
And then go into I don't know why I'm bothering moving these, actually, because you're going to move them all. Sorry, I can't help myself. Sorry, I've done that the wrong way around anyway. I think I'd do it like that, and then I'd get them to come back, and I'd say, what do you think? Has anybody got any ideas of what that activity was connected to, or whatever it is, do you know? And then I'd go on to disguise compliance. Which I think, and I've always liked that activity anyway. So that's that. I'd maybe hide this and have this, depending on if disguise compliance for the group you're doing comes up as a big theme. Do have this one as well. But you might find that you've done enough on disguise compliance. So, but when you do, after you've done that activity, when you come on to this one, there needs to be something that really contextualizes why we're focusing on disguise compliance. And that can be serious case review. In every awareness and alert it's asked about, people are forever asking for more information about it or whatever. And then have that activity if you think that it's needed, relevant, will be useful, but not just for the sake of it. Again, the same here. You might find that actually with exploring the other stuff in more detail, you can't go into this much detail with the themes. You might not, but just in case. So this bit's going up with legislation anyway, isn't it? So the domestic abuse stuff is really important that we do some of that, focus on that we do focus on some of that. But I think that you also have to do that within the context of COVID. And there's no reference to COVID here at all. Do you know, where are we at the moment? Where are we seeing it going, kind of thing? That would be up with the legislation. Yeah, again, I just don't know whether that might be, you decide when you're putting together the disguised compliance bit, but it just might be too much
Yeah.
on the disguised compliance.
So that goes up the top
So
threshold.
this is going up the top, but there does need to be a discussion at some point within the course about, and this might be, it might be using this slide again or something similar, I don't know, but there does need to be some type of discussion around what do you do if you make a report and it's not picked up by social care? How do you escalate that?
Yeah, that's further on down.
All right,
So
fantastic.
we were going to do this and then a bit of so like you said, I need to put it into the lesson plan of them bringing in a bit of that. Do people remember the key things around responding to disclosure and have those slides up
Yeah,
briefly while people are talking about it, of like what are the key things to respond around that initial reporting as well, and then bring in that, okay, then what do we have those issues around local authority? How do we escalate it? How do we, because that is a common theme that comes up as well. And I feel sometimes we need to, because this is near the end of Alerta,
yeah,
and they will sometimes have a bit of a frustration rant around local authorities don't pick it up. We're continually doing the same referral back over and
yeah,
over again. So I thought that would be quite good. So very much like you were saying with the legislation, is actually then just like you said, have these up for a couple of seconds while people are talking about them.
yeah,
Ask what do you remember from the key things around responding to a disclosure, key things around reporting, and
yeah,
making that referral.
yeah. So if you can just make that clearer so that this is a reminder
Yeah,
again, that would be perfect.
yeah,
I don't necessarily think that all of these slides are going to be needed.
yeah.
I
And
think
then
if
that was,
we,
and then I
yeah,
think,
I think this is too repetitive.
yeah,
I think we need to have the discussions around it, but I think it's too repetitive. I think as well, we've only up here, if we're going through that theme of refreshing them, and then so really we're refreshing them, then we're exploring the humankind stuff, then we're giving them new information, then we're refreshing them again. So I guess it's the refresher at the beginning. So I guess you'd put something along the lines of, let me just think, so it'd be refresh knowledge on so and then humankind focus. Then it would be introduce. And then it'd be refresh knowledge on reporting, wouldn't it?
yeah,
Something along those lines.
yeah,
Around there. But what I'm just thinking of, if this is the intro slide for what's changed and what we're focusing on, we need to give them more of this, if that makes sense. We're also saying COVID. I know you're going to change this, but it's just so that
yeah.
COVID. Oh. So the COVID bit does only need to be a couple of slides. It'll be the COVID legislation and then the possible impact that we're seeing, rising mental health, rising domestic abuse, rising this, having to work differently, blah, 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 all of that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But that can be on a slide or two. And then, but it needs to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And the same with the domestic abuse bill. So I think that I'd probably take that one out for now. So this is why I don't mess with them. And feel free to send it to Holly to sort out all the formatting and stuff. That's fine. I think I'd probably take this one out for now because this is so last 3 years ago as well.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, I think it's
because we have to focus on them. We can't put them here and then not talk about them.
yeah, which is why maybe around mental health and self-neglect, because that is such a common theme that they do bring up, and they work. I think they work with it so much, and they struggle with the fact of that self-neglect if it's an adult. I mean, someone the other week said, I'm working with someone and I really wish there was children in the house, because at least then I know it'd be picked up for the children element, but because it's a single adult and they're saying there is capacity, that obviously then it's very much around, it's his choice to live like that, and he's not really harming anyone, and it just brought out there were so many, and I was like, this is a really common theme that is coming through the last, especially since going online. I think maybe people are picking it up more because of COVID and understanding the mental health impact it's having on people as well. That a lot of people are saying, well, we're seeing self-neglect more now because of the impact of COVID is having, because people their routines are changing, they're not looking after themselves. Bereavement, grief, all that kind of stuff, they're just, capacity is changing temporarily because of all the impact.
Yeah.
So that might be a good one to bring up.
Don't you love my spelling? So I've just changed that just to the things that you've covered.
Yep.
So exploitation. Shall I put it happens to adults too? Because that's what you're wanting to do, is talk about, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I would still, because I think if we just put exploitation, people are going to go, oh, but everybody's been talking about that for years, do you know? And it's not just exploitation. That's what you mean. That's not what you mean, is it?
Yeah, and I think because also then we have those discussions. We had that a while back of how someone, and she voiced things that I've been voicing for a while, is that not just in Taylor, everywhere, of that how the shift to now we're focusing so much on county lines that we seem to forget a bit around CSE as well, and that actually sexual abuse does happen in county lines.
Yeah.
But again, because we think of that gender thing, we think of county lines as boys and youth offending, and CSE as girls and sexual abuse, and you're like, well, actually, it's all the same.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff as well. So it does bring it, and you can see some people go, oh yeah, actually.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, and so when you're talking about, so all of the stuff that you're telling me now, that's what you need to put in the lesson plan, because the other people won't know that. Because the reason why I specifically asked you to do this one is because you do so many awareness and alerters. This is about filling in those gaps.
Yeah.
But it's really importantly about reflecting on what they've done over the last 3 years as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No problem.
So yeah, that's perfect.
If we're taking out the organisational one, so we'll take out those 2 slides there that you've just gone. I think they're a bit further up above the safeguarding principles.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Those 2.
Yeah, I don't think it's needed at the moment.
Yeah. But then that gives me time to maybe find a bit more around exploitation, to see if there are, maybe there's a video for exploitation for adults, how it's impacting them.
Yeah.
To then bring in those discussions instead, and then obviously then, like we said, then that can introduce the exploitation slides as well.
Yeah. It's just about really focusing on what they're seeing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then really linking it back to them continually. That's all that. And then this bit, so I would have some of this, but I probably just wouldn't have all of it.
Yeah.
And I would have it as reminders, and I'd reframe it as reminders, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then I would have I wouldn't have an activity. Yeah, so in fact, that's the exact activity that I was going to say I would then have.
Yeah.
That's perfect. And frame that as a reminder.
Yeah.
Take that out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so sorry. So I would take this one out.
Okay.
And use this one instead. And I'd finish with how is safeguarding and what you've learned today, what we've discussed today, connected to these.
Yeah.
And that's what I'd keep going back to rather than that one.
Mm-hmm.
Because you end up running through that one and they're like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
So I'd go back to this. And actually, I would probably, could this be done as a slider or something that's then kept? Do you know, how is safeguarding connected to how's safeguarding what you've learned connected to your values? And then ask each of them to write something about it, because that would be awesome to send back to humankind.
Yeah, we can do, because you can enter it so that it looks like they're speech bubbles. They've got freehand text, so they can just type in what they think those words mean. So then it comes up with a load of like bubble of text of what people have entered. So yeah. We can then screenshot it and send it back.
Then obviously we're always going to finish on that.
Yeah.
And then we're going to change that to obviously
reflect on the other one.
Yeah. So can you see, so that's the reason I wanted to speak to you, because actually I've, as much as most of the information there is there, I've completely rechanged it all.
Yeah.
And then from an activity perspective, in fact, I think they go back into group. No, that's the wrong one. Is there a couple of breakout bits in the afternoon? There will be, won't there?
Yeah, there's one. Yeah, well, there's one around around the local authority, because they're going to put in groups for local authority.
And then the disguise compliance one, they do that one on their own, don't they? Can't remember.
They do the first one, that one on their own.
Yeah.
Because then I thought, because the bottom at the bit was record your thoughts and feelings you don't have to share. But I thought if they did it on a word cloud, it makes it a bit more anonymous, and then like the facilitator can pick out certain words and just have discussions rather than going, oh, I see you put this, and put someone on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
And then obviously if they do the other activity as well with the scenarios, they would go into groups for that if there's time, if we need to feed it out a bit more.
Yeah, and we've got also there's a couple of quizzes in there, isn't there?
Yeah.
And then we've got the long form one, where they're going to put how it's connected to these things.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's obviously the poll at the beginning as well, so it should be quite interactive and a few different elements as well. So depending on how many Slido will let me do, then I can always just do the poll as a normal Zoom poll as well.
Perfect.
So there is that mixture and things. So
yeah, no, that's fantastic. Brilliant. Hopefully that's been helpful.
Yeah, it has.
I will leave you to play around with it and then send me it back when you're done.